Yesterday, we discussed about a few elements that led to Renaissance in England, and the most important thing which I told you yesterday, it was not the only important thing, but the most important thing which I told you yesterday was that uh, Renaissance began by following the lead of France and Italy, and primarily Italy, because in Italy the old classics, as we know, Socrates, Aristotle, Plato, and other dramatists, their works were being translated in Latin or in the modern versions of these works were in the market. And it influenced the poets of Italy. The poets of Italy introduced stanza and also they worked with the literary form of sonnet during the same era. Petrarch and Boccaccio, these two were the main poets at that time, and also Dante, he was also a major poet, and they were working with different innovative ideas, and this led to innovation in literary forms, and this was the time when sonnet was being written, and when the Renaissance in Italy was going on, it had little impact on England. When it was at the prime in Italy, it had little impact on England, and it was due to two reasons. One was the war between England and France, the Hundred Years of War, and the other was the War of Roses, because England was facing internal turmoil at that time, and whenever there is internal turmoil, the literature also suffers and suffers a lot, and one can say that literate sometimes the political turmoils give birth to best literature. Yes, it is true, but if the whole society is in turmoil and everyone is unsure, no one is sure about what is going to happen the next day, then in this uncertainty, uh, it is impossible. It was impossible at that time to publish something because you know at that time there was no printing press and they had to rely on the handwritten manuscripts, and the manuscripts only produced one were produced only one or two copies. The manuscript writers, as they were known in uh, the copiers only produced one or two copies after 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and in this way the circulation was quite impossible, and this was the reason that many of the works were not written at that time, and they were probably lost. And when the period of turmoil was over, as we discussed yesterday, that the War of Roses ended in 1400, 14 and 1485, or what was the date? 1485, yes, 1485. And when the War of Roses ended, a new king in England wore the crown, and it was known as the house, the Tudors. The king's name was King Henry VIII, and I told you the story of how Henry broke away from the from the Roman Catholic Church and established a new church, which was named as the uh, the Church of England. So today, now I begin with two important personalities of that era, and I will try to shed more light on uh, the breakaway of the church from the Roman Catholic Church and the establishment of uh, the new church, which is known as the Church of England. So, first of all, uh, there were two important persons during that time. One was Erasmus. He was from Germany. Sorry, he was Dutch, and another person, Sir Thomas More. who was from England. And as I told you yesterday, that King Henry wanted to have a new wife, and he divorced, and he wanted to divorce his previous wife on account of having a male heir. And when he decided this, he had to break away from the Roman Catholic Church and establish a new church, which was the Church of England. And now this is also known as Reformation. There is a difference between Reformation and Restoration. You must be sure of these two terms. Restoration occurs after the Puritan age, and Reformation is the point in history of England when the Roman Catholic Church was, the Church of England was established, and it broke away from the Roman Catholic Church. This is known as this phenomena, or this important political move is known as Reformation. And the king now gains a new sort of power. And previously, the Pope was the center of power, and he was considered the shadow of God and the defender of faith. But now the king was the defender of faith, and he was God's closest representative on earth in the form of human beings. So the new king, assumed a very solid position. And about that time, a person named Martin Luther, he wrote, I told yesterday about his uh, work that he wrote 95 theses. Maybe it is in the sheet which I gave you earlier. And the 95 thesis was actually a satire on the previous church, the Roman Catholic Church. And it satirized the practices, or the corrupt practices, of the Roman Catholic Church. Although King Henry was excommunicated by the Roman Catholic Church, or he broke away from the Roman Catholic Church, but he still disagreed with Martin Luther, and no one accepted his ideas because he was a reformist and he wanted reforms in the church, and he was one of the followers. You can say he was the followers of the same Wycliffian idea, which gave birth to the house, or to the school of thought of Lollards. And Martin Luther was following their suit, but he was a scholar. He was a very good scholar, very well-known scholar at that time, and he wanted a new political and religious identity for the people in the name of Protestantism. And the Protestants at that time, they were not acceptable, although the new church was established, the Church of England was established, but still they were not Protestants. They were sort of Catholics, because you know that the reasons of King Henry were not religious reasons. His reasons were purely political, for his personal reasons, you can say, and political reasons as well. But these were not the religious things. And Henry himself was Roman Catholic, and he remained a Catholic. He never became a Protestant. But the Protestants were proliferating. There were a huge number gathering of Protestants, and it was partly because of the new church, and partly because of the teachings or the preachings of Martin Luther and his followers. They all were working on Protestantism, and they were working towards Reformation, and they wanted a new identity, and they wanted to establish a distinct identity from Europe. And now, if you look at the political scene, the whole of Europe, excluding England, is under the Roman Catholic Church. And England has a church of its own. And when England has its church, the center of power is shifted from Rome to England. And it was during this time that England's identity became separate from the European identity. And until now, the English people believe themselves to be superior to uh, the other European nations. And the reasons are much more uh, diverse than they were in those days, because now they were considered superpower before America and Russia and China and everyone. When there was no superpower in the world, only the King of England ruled, and because they ruled uh, Africa and Asia and America and Australia, New Zealand, and also Caribbean. So the almost the whole world was under the British control during the time of colonization. So uh, this was the political scene, and England's new identity was being established, and it was partly during this time that a Dutch scholar named Erasmus, he wrote a book named The Praise of Folly. The Praise of Folly was actually a challenge to to the Roman Catholic Church. Sorry, someone is waiting here. The Praise of Folly was, in fact, a satire on the Roman Catholic Church, and it was targeted against all the malpractices of the church. It was targeted against all the uh, bad practices of the churchmen and the corruption in the church. And his ideas were almost similar to the points which were raised by Martin Luther. But he had his own unique audience, and his audience was a sort of literary audience, and he was a very scholarly person, and he had the enthusiasm of classical literature because he was a scholar of the classical literature, the literature of the Greek literature, the Latin literature, and he was a scholar of these literatures. And he wrote the book in Latin, but still, even in Latin, his work was, at that time, there was a printing press, and his work traveled across the Europe, and it was translated into English very quickly. Uh, Very quickly, yeah, you can say that it was translated about in a month or two. And then, please turn off your mics. Okay, and uh, in prayer, when the praise of folly was circulated all over the Europe, a new ideology step was being established in the people. Although it was not visible at that time, but the historians, when they look back, they find a marked change in the thinking of the people. The people now began to question the old institutions which were never being questioned. They were started questioning, sorry, they started questioning the practices of the church, the oppression of the church, and the exploitation of the monks and the clerics of the church. And they began to question their own position in the society. Write the name of satire. Which satire? I gave you the file on which everything is written about today's lecture, so you can see the names from there. So I was where I was. Okay. Uh, so the praise of folly in, inculcated a new idea in people that the institutions, the age-old institutions, can be questioned, and they must be questioned in favor of the public. Another book, very important book that was written during this time, and it was written in the time of Henry IV. And this book is named Utopia by Sir Thomas More. And Thomas More and Thomas Mallory, you must distinguish between these two people, and maybe they can ask you about utopia or the writer of utopia, and you may be confused about this. So, so Thomas More, there is another important event that is related to Sir Thomas More, that this person, this literary person, and very politically very strong person, was beheaded, by the king, King Henry, this King Henry VIII, who broke away from the church. And it was from the same reason that he beheaded uh, Sir Thomas More, because Thomas More refused to support the king in the act of divorce. When king wanted to divorce, the Pope disagreed and Thomas More disagreed. Because and the kings in those days, they never liked disagreement. And when he disagreed, he was charged with treason and he was beheaded. And probably his head was hanged somewhere uh, for some days, because it was the practice with the traitors. So, but Thomas More had written Utopia before that. Utopia means, it is a Greek language word which means the no land, the no man's land, or the no place, no place, or the place that never exists or that never existed. Utopia is based on the age-old question of the combination, or you can say the relationship between the state and the individual. It was the main purpose of uh, utopia. The question of individual and the society. In utopia, Thomas More used the three important words, and which became very common in the French Revolution and later on in European history. And these words were liberty, fraternity, and equality. Combination between, no, it was not a combination between, combination between what? I forget what I was saying or what I have said. Okay, I can repeat what I was saying about utopia. Utopia is about, oh, you were asking about the question. That it addressed the age-old question of the relationship between individual and the state, the individual and the whole hierarchy of power. The idea of utopia was discussed in Plato's Republic, and it was discussed by many scholars, because all the philosophers and scholars of the past, they wanted to have a good relationship between individual and the authorities and the government. But it is impossible to find a perfect relationship. And Thomas More, in his Utopia, he gives very interesting story of a nation who have many similar things, whose life is very perfect, whose lives are very perfect, near perfection, you can say. And these were the people who had the same type of clothing, they had the same things to eat, and they they were given the fundamental rights, and all the citizens in Utopia. In the it is not a novel, but it is considered a work of novel. It can be considered a work of novel since it is a work of fiction, or it is a fictional philosophy, you can say. But at that time, there was no clear distinctions. So, and novel was never being attempted. So you can say it was a philosophical work, but it was based on imaginative world. And like Plato's Republic, Plato in his Republic gave an idea of an ideal country in which there is no problem, no problem. The life is perfect. The individuals and the government, they are in perfect relationship and all that. And in Utopia, Thomas More did the same thing or tried to do the same thing. He uh, presented the story how the sick were tended, and they were tended in equal measures, like the rich were treated in the same manner as the poor, and there was difference between there was no difference between the dressing of the rich and the dressing of the poor. Everyone was dressing in the same way, and interestingly, uh, this happened in the real world when during the time of Russian Revolution, uh, when the Marxists they were ruling the Russian society. Although uh, the whole Russia is still Marxist and they are still socialist, but there was a time when every one of them wore the same sort of hat, they wore the same sort of had the same sort of wages, had the same dresses and everything else. But Thomas More's Utopia shows that how the peasants and how the whole society is living in a very complacent manner, in a very peaceful manner. Everything is going perfectly fine, and everyone or every person in the society was educated the fundamental arts and the fundamental things. So it was a near to perfection, beautiful world. Uh, but it had two parts. This one, which I have told you, is the second part and is more famous one. But it also had the first part, and the first part was about the present at that time, the contemporary situation of his times, and it told of the suffering, of the war, of the lawlessness, of the unwholesome life they were living in, and the corruption of the church, and the land grabbing by the rich, the exploitation, and all that. So everything else, he wrote the book in two parts. The first part dealt with the current situation or the contemporary situation of England, and the second part was the ideal situation in the future, which was in the mind of Thomas More. So we have discussed two writers of the era, Thomas More and Erasmus. And the third one is not a writer. Martin Luther is not a writer. He is a reformer. And you must only know the name and the name of the book, the 95 Theses. And but you must know the work of Erasmus and the work of Thomas More. And now, after the break, we will discuss uh, Tyndale's New Testament and the translation of Bible, and White and Surrey, the Lord of Surrey or the Earl of Surrey, and White. And after discussing these two, I will again give you an outline or the important points of the Renaissance, because Renaissance is not over, and I just wanted to cover the boredom, and that's why I just went on with the writers. And after the break, I will discuss two more writers and then three more writers, and then I will give you an overview of the age of Renaissance. We are on break now for 6 to 7 minutes. Now.